Welcome to this Help on Demand panel on ICHRA. This webinar is being brought to you by Help on Demand. Help on Demand helps carriers and exchanges intelligently and instantly route leads directly to participating brokers. And it's all done through an easy-to-use app. In just the last 12 months, Help on Demand delivered over 217,000 leads to independent brokers. Because Help on Demand delivers these leads seconds after prospects enter their information, brokers attain an average close ratio of 24.6%. Ask your favorite carriers and exchanges how you can participate in this one-of-a-kind lead program. Help on Demand is committed to your success beyond delivering leads, which is why they are providing this educational program. This session focuses on individual health coverage reimbursement arrangements, or ICHRAs, which is a powerful way to expand your market and increase your sales. My name is Alan Katz. I'm co-founder of Next Agency. Next Agency is an agency management system featuring CRM, marketing, and commission tools designed to save agencies selling benefits, life, and senior products, time, money, and clients. You can learn more about us at nextagency.com. I've been in the benefits business for nearly 4 decades in all the positions I've held, whether it was president of National Association of Health Underwriters, head of individual and small group sales at WellPoint, or leading Centerstone, a general agency now known as Benefit Mall. I've been active in developing innovative products, platforms, and services to help brokers like you grow your business. That's why I was delighted when Help on Demand asked me to moderate this panel, because ICHRAs are one of the more exciting innovations to come along in recent years. I'm also delighted that Help on Demand has brought together a terrific panel of experts for this webinar. Whether you're brand new to ICHRAs or already selling them, today you'll learn how to use them to grow your business. If you have questions during the course of this discussion, please enter them in the Q&A chat box, which is on that bar the team has to annoy you on your screen. So click on the Q&A chat box. The producers will go through those questions and feed them to me to ask the panel. We'll do our best to get to as many of them as possible. Those we don't get to, we'll try to answer in follow-up emails. So let's get right to it and meet our panel of experts. Tom, can you please kick us off and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Tom Crennan. I've been kind of an unusual background. I was a petroleum engineer for about 25 years, and now I've been in health insurance. I have an agency called Colorado Health for about 26 years. And so I've been a local native selling Colorado health insurance here, and built a system. We're pretty software oriented, but built a system called ICHRA Systems, which is primarily for brokers to sell ICHRAs to employers. And we work always with brokers, and that's kind of our niche in life. But that's who I am.
Well, thank you. And Craig, let's hear about your background.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Craig Domaraki. I'm president of markets for Friday Health Plans. Friday Health Plans, what we do is we provide next generation consumer-friendly ACA compliant plans to individuals under the age of 65. Currently, we're in 7 states. We serve over 380,000 members. We service 17,000 brokers in those states, and we have over 700 employees in Denver, Alamosa, Colorado, and other folks in the states we serve. Personally, I've been in the health insurance business over 30 years. I've worked in every individual segment, individual ACA, Medicare Advantage, and managed Medicaid, and I've also worked in every group type business, everything from small group to national accounts. I worked for 2 large national carriers as well as local and regional carriers. The reason I'm here today is obviously we're in the individual, Friday is in the individual ACA business. And given the macro trends and the regulatory and policy trends, we expect the individual business to continue to grow significantly in the future, as well as it is right now. Towards that end, we expect the ICHRA business to be a main avenue to growing the ACA business. And to that end, for the last 3 years, we've been educating the brokerage community and the employer community on the value of ICHRAs, even to the extent that we've created benefit plans that mirror some group plans. So when people make a change from a group to individual, they see similar plans. And my last point is we're such believers in this. We're looking extremely hard and diligent at doing the ICHRA structure for our own employees. So thanks again for the invitation, for having me.
Thank you, Craig. And Senator Smallwood.
Hi, Alan. Thanks to you and the Help on Demand team for having me. My name is Jim Smallwood. I'm the president of employee benefits at Moody Insurance here in Denver, Colorado, and have been in the employee benefits business for 29 years, so my entire adult life. And then 7 years ago, decided to run for the state Senate and won that seat. So I'm currently representing Colorado State Senate District 4. And am nearing the end of the 8-year term limits that Colorado has in place for our citizen legislators. And I've formerly chaired the Health and Human Services Committee. I ran for office primarily wanting to get involved in health policy. I'm the current chair of the Legislative Audit Committee, so overseeing most of the state and quasi-state organizations that get audited in our state. And really, again, having focused on healthcare-driven initiatives such as the actuarial review bill that we passed in the state of Colorado, some small group carrier requirement bills that I think really benefit those small groups that happen to grow into large groups and don't necessarily want to pay large group rates. Worked really hard on the some controversial out-of-network bill in the state of Colorado, and then probably more than anything else, just fighting against what I found, and I think most brokers and insurance consultants and even many health policy experts would agree are not necessarily great ideas for our citizens. Things like Colorado's proposed public option bill, at least as it was written. I think, real dangerous single payer types of concepts. So worked really hard to make sure that voices like mine were heard in the General Assembly on those issues. And again, happy to be here.
And we're delighted to have you here. And I want to thank all the panels for making the time to do this. And as you can see, they all are engaged with ICHRAs, but come at it from different doors, if you will. So I'm going to start off with a question for Tom. And what I want to start off is just some basics. We've got people on this webinar who are very experienced with ICHRA, and we've got some who are brand new to it. So Tom, can you just describe for us in high level what the law is, who it applies to, how does it differ from small group insurance, those kind of basic issues?
Sure. Thanks, Alan. So I'll just give you a little background on it. I think over time, a lot of companies, maybe smaller companies, have just simply bumped the salaries for their employees and said, go out and buy individual policies. And then kind of the next step in that, there was a program called ICHRA that came along and basically put a little more structure to that on things. And then ICHRA basically was developed in 2019 and approved for January 1st, 2020, which is kind of a formal method in which employers can pay for employees' individual policies. So the idea, what makes it different than before is instead of just bumping the salary is that you can actually do it. It's actually a little bit more legitimate. It ends up being a full-blown ERISA plan, just the same as any traditional group plan. So it meets the requirements for pay or play for large employers. And the employees' portion, when they pick an individual plan, their share of the cost could be taken out of their payroll tax-free. So that's kind of the big transition on it, is for the first time, employers can now allow their employees to buy individual policies and get the tax benefits of having it for tax-free things.
Great.
It is a true group health plan. It's a true group health plan using individual policies.
Great, thank you. And Craig, can you expand a bit on why it was enacted? What was the problem they were trying to solve?
Well, a couple levels, Alan. First of all, at a real high macro level, obviously the goal is to get more people insured and more individuals insured. But when you peel that onion a little further, it was really a couple of points Tom made. It was meant to help employers that may not offer group health insurance an avenue to offer some type of health insurance or fund some type of health insurance. On the other side, group plan or employers that already had group plans, it gives them a way to be more flexible in their offering. So you can offer what I would call traditional group plan, but you can also offer an ICHRA right next to it. So if you've got, a large concentration of employees in one city, but a few, in some state where it's not really easy to get group insurance cover, they can do an ICHRA for people in another geography. So in a lot of different ways, it's added flexibility for those groups that need that flexibility, but also gave opportunity to employers that don't offer it yet to fund some type of health insurance for those folks.
Great, thank you. And Jim, are you finding that ICHRA is expanding your market, or is it cannibalizing existing business? Put another way, why should brokers care that it's out there? And how are you using it?
Well, I think brokers need to care just like they care about anything else that's been driven by a legislative or a regulatory change, which is it's new-ish, it's dynamic. And if you're not talking to your clients about it, somebody else most certainly is going to be talking to your clients about it at some point. Just the concept in and of itself, I think, is so popular that once all of the wrinkles are ironed out of this thing, the idea of American citizens being able to control their own healthcare decisions is simply very, very popular. And personally, I think it's really, really smart. Also, it was I get criticized a lot about speaking out against the bad parts of the Affordable Care Act. I think we would all agree there were tons of really, really good parts of the Affordable Care Act, but the rough part was that for most Americans, it made your boss the person that decides which kind of health insurance you get. And I think a lot of us would agree that quite possibly the worst person in the world to be making your healthcare decisions would be your boss at work. And so the fact that ICHRA finally moves us away from that concept. Again, it doesn't matter where you're at on the political spectrum. Most people would think that that's a pretty good idea. So I think when you combine that, people love the concept, and in a lot of places financially it makes a ton of sense. You combine those together, and it's something that I think every employee benefits consultant should at least be talking to their clients about and letting them make the decision as to whether or not it's something they're interested in pursuing.
And Tom, let me do sort of a follow-up on that with you. Do you find that clients are saving money when they bring an ICHRA in, and is it a true savings overall, or is it passing some of what the employer would normally pay on to employees?
Thanks, Alan. So yeah, I would say yes. I would say one of the major drivers for ICHRAs is that sometimes that depends on the market. They're not perfect for everybody, but sometimes the individual policies are just simply less expensive than small group policies. I might bring up a slide. We have a heat map that we put together on that. And if you guys can see that, you'll see that we did this for 2023 based off of the DOI rate filings, which aren't finalized, but are pretty close to being right. And it somewhat mimics what we saw last year, but there's been a few changes. So first of all, Colorado is a very good state for ICHRAs, primarily because Colorado individual policies are less expensive than small group, not self-funded necessarily or anything, but than small group. And the major reason for that is because Colorado has reinsurance. So they have a little bit of an edge on the individual side to have lower rates than the small group rates do. But if you look at it, if you look at like Grand County, that kind of sticks out and it kind of runs down the mountains there all the way to the, I guess, the southwest corner down into Durango and La Plata down at there at the bottom of the state. Those dark red areas, kind of a Peak Health Alliance, Southwest Health Alliance area. Those are running, if you look at the legend, they're running like 36 to 39% less than the lowest priced bronze plan. So they're not, so small group plans offer things that individual plans don't. But if you look at the lowest cost bronze plan on the individual market versus the lowest cost bronze plan on the small group market, which tend to be somewhat similar, and usually they have the smallest doctor networks on both, you'll see that there's like a 39% savings. And then as you go around into the kind of not so red areas, well, I don't know, the next area out, you'll see that places like Eagle County and Garfield and things like that are still looking quite good. They're in the 27% savings. Mesa County, Grand Junction, which is kind of in the orange, is around the 20-something% savings. New for this year that is interesting is that Denver area, at least 4 counties in the Denver metro area, actually look pretty good for ICHRAs. And I will tell you, it's kind of for a unique reason. It's because Denver Health came into the, well, they've been with the individual market for a long time, but they came in with very aggressive rates in 2023. So there are some definitely lower premiums with Denver Health and generally lower premiums with the other carriers. But Denver Health is definitely an outlier. And then Pueblo, which is interesting, is the worst state for ICHRAs, or the worst county for ICHRAs, and it's still about a 7% savings. So anyway,
so there's definitely ways to save money. Does it shift the cost to the employees, or does it simply reduce the cost of coverage because they're moving from more expensive group to less expensive individual? So
the underlying policies are less expensive, and then it's up to the employer to decide how much of those they want to spend. So they can either do a lump sum where they can say, we'll give everybody $400 and you can go buy a plan, or we recommend kind of an age-based system, a reference plan where they say we'll pay for 80% of the lowest cost silver plan, and then they can go and pick whatever plan they want. But yeah, no, it depends what the employer does. I hate to talk too much about it, but you do see for some companies where they're just simply trying to offer some health insurance that works for part-time people, they can be extremely low. They can say, we'll pay $50 or maybe even nothing of the ICHRA, but the employees will still get to pay for their share tax-free. So that's a benefit there. But most employers, what I've seen, are pretty generous, and they look just like small group contributions generally.
Okay, great. Thank you. Craig, this sort of brings us to the mechanics of ICHRAs. Can you talk a bit about how they're implemented, how they operate, what's legal to do with them and what's not legal, things along those lines? Let's keep the audience out of jail if at all possible, so they're free to attend the next educational program Help on Demand does.
Well, that's pretty detailed question, so I'll kind of answer it a couple of levels, and then we'll go from there. So the high level mechanics, and I'll compare it to a traditional, group insurance plan. So typically an employer, buys a group plan, and they buy it from a single carrier, say carrier A, and they may get 1 or 2 or maybe 3 plan designs that the employee can pick from. So then the employee obviously picks one. Employer decides how much they want to give that employee to fund that, and then the employee has whatever they have to contribute. The difference with ICHRA is that, the employer sets it up from an administrative perspective. They decide how much they want to give the employee towards their health insurance, and then the employee goes out and buys individual coverage, either on the marketplace or off exchange. So that's kind of the fundamental difference on how employee and employer would see the difference. As far as setting it up, ideally you want to work with, a qualified administrator, and there's a bunch out there, and we talk and work with all of them. And then the right education has to happen, right? The right education, the broker has to have the education, the employer has to have the education, the employee has to have the education. And obviously, like anything else, there's compliance issues here. So all those folks involved have to make sure they're meeting all the regulatory and compliance issues. And the biggest thing, once you get everything set up, is when the employee goes to buy insurance, you just want to make sure they have the right guidance, because to the extent it's an employee that's used to having group insurance, they're not used to go out and buying their own health insurance. So you just want to make sure that they have the right support, whether it's a broker or somebody else providing guidance to help them pick what the right plan is for them. From a legal standpoint, an employer can have 11 different classes and, there's no limit on the contribution. So, I believe Tom mentioned the QSARA. So when ICHRA went in, it opened up the boundaries a lot more. So it's a lot more flexible and there's a lot less constraints. So that's really at a high level.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Jim, who's the target market for this? It sounds like it needs to be a group that has enough sophistication to consider something out of the box, but it also sounds like it might be companies that have a very diverse workforce. What target market do you see out there?
Well, we've seen interest pretty much across industries and across group sizes in our state. So I would say that in those areas where the rate differential between individual and group is largest, that tends to be the market that's very interested in having the conversation first and foremost. I think any employer who feels as you mentioned, Alan, their employees have either enough sophistication to figure out an individual purchasing decision with help, because again, employers across the country have been very paternalistic or maternalistic when it comes to providing these benefits and kind of vetting out the carriers and selecting plans on their behalf. To have somebody do this now on their own takes either a certain level of sophistication, or what I found is maybe even a certain level of not caring so much. Meaning, if you've got a group of people who, by and large, aren't big users of health plans in the first place, they think that the purchasing healthcare is perhaps a waste of money. Purchasing a health insurance plan, it doesn't really apply to them. They tend to be bulletproof, and they're okay perhaps sacrificing things like a broad national PPO network, right? That tends to be one of the challenges we see in ICHRA, is there's just not that many of those. If for those employer groups who feel their employees don't really care about things like that, we found those to be folks that are very open to the conversation.
Great, thank you. And Tom, we're getting some questions from the audience on the mechanics, and I'm going to pick on you to answer them with no warning. And the two questions that I think kind of dovetail. One is ICHRA is ICHRA a reimbursement program, or is it delivered to the employee in some other way than an after the purchase reimbursement? I guess another way of asking that is, if I decide as an employer I'm going to contribute $300 to my employees' ICHRA, can they take that $300 and buy season tickets to their local team? And also, a sort of a related question: if the employer deducts the cost of the individual plan, the chat is moving on me here. If the employer deducts the cost of the individual plan from each employee's paycheck, does the employer then have to pay the individual's medical insurance premium? Who's actually paying the insurer for the coverage?
So it's a great question, and believe it or not, it's done both ways. So the simple answer is that when ICHRA started out, people saw them more as a health reimbursement arrangement. So they saw people going out and buying their own plans, and then you would reimburse them. And there's parts of the law that are built into it where they have to have attestation. You have to prove that the money went to the individuals. What we're seeing, the problem with that one is it's harder to do through payroll deduction. So the trend is going so that basically the employer is paying the individual policies, and the employee's portion of it is coming out of their paycheck, tax-free through a Section 125 plan, just like traditional group insurance. So there's still there's a wide variety of ICHRA administrators. There's everybody from people who do reimbursement and have apps on the phone where you take a picture of the bill and they'll reimburse you for it, to people who definitely, like us, honestly, specialize in having the employer pay the policies directly. So the employer would pay the individual policies and then take the employee's share out of their paycheck on a Section 125 plan, just like traditional group health insurance.
Or for those of us old enough to remember list billing. Yeah, Craig, can you address sort of the same thing? For instance, does ICHRA or coverage obtained through ICHRA trigger continuation of coverage state laws or COBRA? And also, can the employee, is the employee still eligible for subsidies in the exchange if they're part of an ICHRA package?
Yeah,
and
a couple of you. Go ahead.
No, I just couldn't remember if I mentioned your name as the person to answer, so I was repeating your name, Craig.
Yeah, obviously others can jump in on this, but COBRA, this is a group plan, so if someone leaves, an employer has to offer COBRA, but a lot of times that really doesn't make sense because as I think most people know, COBRA adds a huge administrative fee. So it's typically better, cost effectiveness for the person to just stay with that plan. If someone's in this plan, if they're in ICHRA, they can't use their subsidies. So that's a pretty simple answer.
Okay, great. So now I want to get to, how does a broker go about presenting ICHRA to an employer and to the employees? All of you have mentioned the need for education, etc. So let's send this one to Tom. Let's pick on Tom. What are the best practices when explaining ICHRA to clients?
Oh, that could be a good Jim one. But anyway,
who are you, Tom? I didn't mean Tom.
No, but I don't know. I'll let Jim chime in on that one also. I just think it's an option for people. In my opinion, it's typically for groups that are, very cost conscious. You see it in a lot of service industries and things like that. So you got to get a feel kind of for what your group is. I would say just in general, if you have a group maybe of high priced lawyers that want a PPO plan, I would not spend a lot of time trying to present an ICHRA to them. It's not going to be a good fit. If you have maybe a restaurant with, you have a bunch of waiters and you're kind of cost conscious about things and you want to maybe avoid that you have over 50 employees with pay or play, then I think you definitely do want to talk about an ICHRA. So, I guess it's just a matter of feeling out the client and seeing whether it's a good fit for them.
Okay.
I don't know if I answered that question.
No, you did. And Jim, any best practices when you sit down face to face with an employer who this might fit, as to how you explain it so that they're not lost in acronyms and insurance lingo?
Yeah, so I would say that my experience has been that employers tend to grasp the concept pretty easily. Right? This is not a new concept of giving employees money to go figure it out on their own, right? We've been talking about that for decades, but really to partner with an organization that is going to help with the administration of this. Because for an employer to try to envision tracking all of this stuff, first of all, implementing it, explaining all these different plans, we're talking about potentially hundreds of plans to dozens of employees. So like, who's going to help with that, those individual conversations that has to happen. And then once a program's put in place, who's going to be monitoring the reimbursement and how much, who's going to be helping the employers who are dealing with the employer shared responsibility, whether or not they're meeting that across the board. How do they calculate in the first place, right? Because it's a very different calculation than if you're dealing with a group plan. So I have found that the initial conversation is pretty easy, but once a client's interested and they're wanting to get a little bit into the weeds with it, I really think that partnering up with an organization that can help them with the administration of it so they can visualize the entire process from enrollment through billing through the annual renewal process is really key, because that's where we tend to lose people is the details.
Right. Thank you. And Craig, I think you have some thoughts to add here.
Yeah, I just want to add one point, and Tom and Jim know this as well as I do, if not better, but the common issue we like to see make sure gets covered in detail is the flow of the money. Because I would say a year to 18 months ago, that was a huge challenge, because the employer group would love for everything to flow the same way it is now for their traditional plan. So, I think out of the gate, there was a variety of ways to solve that gap. And I think over the last 12 months or so, a lot of the ICHRA administrators have found a way to make that a lot smoother for the employers. But I just want to bring that up because that's very common, at least what we see in a lot of the implementations where clients really need educated.
And as was mentioned earlier, administrators have, well, there are different administrators, or maybe the same one, who have different ways of making the money flow, whether it's a reimbursement or the list bill or what have you. What, Craig, while the camera was on you, I was going to ask you this. What are the pitfalls that employers need to be warned about when implementing one of these?
Well, I would go back to a point I think all of us touched at one point is, anytime, in my 30 years in this industry, I remember when HMOs first came out and there was, revolutions when you went to do open enrollment. So I guess I learned the hard way over the years of offering new programs that the people you really got to educate the most are the employees. And especially with an ICHRA, because you're asking them to take another level, you're asking them to go out and buy their own plan. So from my perspective, the biggest pitfall could be is if you don't spend the time to educate and really help your employees once it's their turn to do what they're supposed to do.
And Tom, in addition to any other pitfalls you're aware of, what tools are out there for brokers who need to communicate this to employers, to employees, to figure out what kind of administrator they want? What kind of tools are available?
So I guess I'm going to give a plug for a friend, but the ICHRA Shop is a company that compares different ICHRA administrators. I do think that different ICHRA administrators some work better for certain areas than others. I mean, it depends. There's a lot of different ICHRA administrators, and I think some fit better than others for things. So I guess that would be potentially a tool, is to search that out. I would go back to a little bit to pitfalls, and maybe this is specific to our system, but they mentioned that COBRA is something that you do have to do so there's a lot of compliance with ICHRAs. There's PCORI forms that have to be done. There's COBRA that has to be forms that have to be filled out. For us, at least, the COBRA is a little different. If you're not doing the reimbursement model and you're having the employee pay for it, or the employer pay for it, you need to make sure that the employer's contribution towards the plan is terminated, and then the employee has the option to carry on the plan. So that's probably the number one pitfall we see, is just making really clear to the employers that they need to kind of be on top of it. If somebody leaves, they need to talk to their ICHRA administrator and make sure that the billing runs correctly on that.
And Tom, just to follow up on that, and to be explicit, ICHRA is portable in essence. The individual policy, the employee purchase, they can take with them even when the employer is no longer sharing in the cost.
Absolutely. So that's one of the unique things. So ICHRAs have a very different COBRA notice associated with them. So they have very different options. They can basically continue on with the policy. They can terminate the policy, or they can basically use it as an SEP to enroll in the exchange and maybe get a tax credit plan. So there's things you can do that are a little different with ICHRAs, but yeah, they can keep their same policy for sure. And I won't do this too much, but the other pitfall I see a little bit sometimes is that people will enroll in a Connect for Health Colorado tax credit plan, an exchange plan, and the employer will be paying part of that. If you can't be on an exchange plan and have your portion of it be tax-free through a Section 125. So that's probably the other pitfall. You need to buy the policies direct. And I did notice a question out there also, if when you're going through and the employees are enrolling, if the plan is determined unaffordable, and now with the family glitch, or unaffordable for their family members, they can go to the exchange and get a tax credit. So you can have some people on a direct plan and some people through the exchange, but like was said, they both can't be there together at the same time. But you can go through and have both avenues work for employees on an ICHRA. Yeah. Okay,
great. And Jim, I don't know if it's fair to ask you this, but other than the friend of Tom who he recommends for finding an administrator, what should you look for in a ICHRA administrator? Obviously, who your partner is in implementing it in compliance is absolutely critical to keeping your license and your client. So what do you look for in an administrator?
Well, I think anybody who's actually gone through the process will tell you that very few things beat time in the saddle. So to work with people who have been doing this since its inception and have had a chance to work some of the bugs out, because the unfortunate thing with a lot of ICHRAs is that administrative piece. It is that when an administrator tells you that they're going to add employees at open enrollment, that those people actually do get added. When they say that they're going to get terminated, that they actually get terminated, that the dollar amounts get applied to the right place at the right time. There's, as Tom mentioned, there's a lot of moving pieces to these things, and an administrator really holds the key to the castle. So I would say interviewing as many of them as you can, because there are several of them, and figuring out, I mean, ideally, if you can talk to clients, especially those who have perhaps been through a renewal cycle, will help you a lot, because there's, I know some of the folks that Tom and I know have gone through this the hard way and had to figure out, okay, which administrators are promising pie in the sky, but at the end of the day aren't really delivering tax. And so I would definitely put that there, and want to reemphasize a couple of things that Craig said, which is the early notification to employees about this. I mean, this is for a lot of these people, they've gone their entire adult lives with somebody else making their health plan decisions, and have never had to do it, because if they ever lost their job, they were on COBRA until they got their next job. So, you know, the normal time frame, let's say in small group in Colorado, where a consultant or a broker is used to taking 60, 90, 120 days to explain the renewal options to an employer, I don't think is anywhere close to enough time to introduce a concept like this, to explain it to workers and then have them prepared for open enrollment. I really think this is something that an employer needs to talk to their employees about like a year in advance, and start dripping information to them saying, hey, there's a better way to buy health insurance for our group. We've decided this, and now we're going to educate you as to what to expect 6 months from now, 9 months from now, is really the logical way to do that.
Craig, sort of a two-part question. Are you finding that's happening in the market where there's this exceptionally long lead time? And then a follow-on on that is, how is the market responding to ICHRAs? Are they selling? Are people aware of them? If you can address that.
Yeah, I would agree there's a long lead time, but I would also say that lead time's gotten a little shorter in the last 12 months. But it's still, I would still say it's a longer time than going through a renewal or selling a new traditional group insurance plan. You know, as I mentioned, we're in 7 states, and in 3 of our states, we see an awful lot of activity. Obviously, Colorado is one, and Georgia's another, and and Texas is another. And it's interesting, I saw in the chat a question on broker compensation. It gets into cannibalizing your own business, so I want to kind of connect some dots here. There's some interesting, I mean, how people are paid. Obviously, anybody that sells individual business typically is paid a commission, and the administrators are paid to administrate it, and there are all various kinds of mechanisms, but one that I've seen in Georgia work really well is where a large group guy or lady has teamed up with an individual broker, and the large group guy does not want to do individual enrollments, but he knows that some of his business is going to go to individual and an ICHRA. So he gets a little administrative fee from the group. The individual broker gets, a normal broker commission. So you have people that are kind of in the food chain doing okay in that process. So, that's kind of where we're seeing a pickup, and it goes back to Tom's point. There's always going to be economics. And if the individual price is lower than the group price, then just out of the gate, the math works. And then it's a matter of, is it the right thing for the employer, and is everybody involved, is everybody going to get paid that should get paid? So I just want to connect a couple of those points.
And when we were talking before, you had some statistics about people's awareness of ICHRAs. First off, when did they start? We may have mentioned this, but
2020.
Yeah. So when we talk about finding an experienced TPA, if you find someone claiming they've been doing ICHRAs for 10 years, you probably should be suspect.
Yeah, but well, yes, absolutely. It's like, well, I don't want to give you an analogy, that wouldn't be good, but I mean, there's definitely, between 3 and 5, at least, including Tom, that have been engaged in this stuff from the beginning. And, if anybody's been listening to Tom, you can tell he knows exactly the detail that goes on in this process. So, to Jim's point, you got to do your due diligence, and it doesn't take long to figure out which ones are really the good, legitimate ones, at least from my perspective.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Tom, speaking of your experience in all this, a couple questions to tie together. One is, what are you seeing is slowing down adoption of ICHRAs, and sort of a longer view on that, or a forward view on that? Are we going to be talking about ICHRAs 5 years from now? Is this a fad that's going to go away, or is it going to carve out a niche or greater in the marketplace, in your estimation?
Well, I'm pretty optimistic on ICHRAs. I would say that I think they're going to continue to grow as people understand them, as long as the individual, I mean, there could be a lot of road bumps. If individual rates become more expensive than small group, I think they're going to have a tough time to a certain degree. But I don't know. I think the individual rates the ICHRAs will continue on. I would say one of the other stumbling blocks for ICHRAs is just the fact that there are no individual carriers in Colorado right now that really have a PPO network associated with them. So when the employees have to go pick a plan, typically, and they maybe have students or something else. Now, Craig's plan, Friday Health, does allow for students, but they're about the only plan in Colorado that allows for an individual employee to have students in another state. So there's some road bumps, on ICHRAs as far as kind of the PPO aspect of things. And they also tend not to be as deluxe. Like there are platinum group plans, and there are no platinum individual plans. So, but as far as my overall feeling towards ICHRAs, I think they'll definitely be here in 5 years, hopefully. It seems like the thing that works on both sides of the aisle for ICHRAs is it seems like it's a good entry for a lot of companies to get into the business. And everybody kind of goes like, well, if we can get more people insured, they're pretty happy about that.
Do any of you have a sense of how large the ICHRA market is now? How across the country? Do we know how many employers or how many employees are covered by ICHRAs? Okay. On to Double Jeopardy.
we all want to know that. We're gathering
that was a surprise question. None of you. Does anyone?
I might roughly answer it. I think it's very small. My guess would be, I don't know what it is, but I would say 1, 2, 3% at the most would be some. I mean, it's a very fledgling industry, is the bottom line. I mean, it's definitely starting.
Yeah, this is the ground floor. And as I think Jim mentioned earlier, if you're not aware of it and bringing it up to your clients, someone else might be using it as a door opener to do just that. So it's definitely worth knowing about. So that brings us I've got a couple more formal questions, and then there's a lot of Q&A from the audience I want to leave time for. But let's see, Jim, if you had never done an ICHRA before, what would you do to prepare yourself to, how do, if you're a newbie to this, how do you get engaged in the market? How do you start selling it?
Well, I know how I did it, which is rely really heavy on people who already have done it. And instead of trying to assume that you can read enough about it and go out and present it on your own, I think is pretty cavalier, pretty ambitious. What I did was partner up on several of them. Tom and I both know people that work exclusively in this area, and just to be collegial and say, look, I've got this client and I want to know if you might be able to go out with me and present ICHRA. Let me know what you know, and you can have all the compensation, or we can split the compensation or something like that. But at the end of the day, what I want to do is make my client happy and learn what I can, pros and cons about ICHRA is exactly how I did it. And so as long as you're not overly greedy, I think there's plenty of ways for everybody to win pursuing it that way.
And Tom, for agencies who have already started with ICHRA, what's your advice for how they can take it to the next level? Are there practices they can engage in that would expand their market for them?
It's a great question, Alan. I wish I knew the answer. I see, you certainly see people. I mean, part of it's marketing, I guess. If you want to just, market the heck out of it, you can get people in there. You need to do acceptance on it. I would say, it's a great fit. Usually, word of mouth. I mean, like, that's probably been how a lot of our growth has happened, is just from people saying, yeah, this one really works well for me. So it sounds crazy, but I'm not quite as quick to push for massive expansion of it. It's kind of a growing industry that needs to kind of learn a little bit along the way. And so there's something to be said for kind of easing into it a little bit, but that's me. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to start through some of the questions that have been coming in, and Craig, this first bunch is coming to you. It's how the exchanges interact with ICHRAs, not just in Colorado, but we have folks in the audience from a number of states. So, if an employee is hired mid-year and they're coming from a group plan or what have you, is that a triggering event? Can they still sign up in exchanges? We've talked about how the subsidies that might be available in exchange are not available if they're getting employer subsidies. But can you touch a little bit on how the exchanges are reacting to ICHRAs and what people need to know about that?
Well, I mean, first on the question, if I understand it correctly, what you said about switching, yeah, that does create an event, and they can sign up, in the individual exchange through the ICHRA. As far as interactions with the exchanges, so in the world right now, we've got state-based exchanges and federal exchanges, right? And at least what we're seeing in the states that we're in, where there's state-based exchanges, you've got a lot more involvement in ICHRAs. And then, the Colorado exchange, those folks are really interested in ICHRAs and trying to help anyway and educate in any way they can. So I think it really varies by state, and it varies by whether it's federal exchange or a state-based exchange. I did want to make two other comments. Alan, you had asked me for statistics, and I didn't give you any, so that I failed on that. But one I wanted to throw out there was, in a recent survey of small, medium-sized employers, basically 64% said that they had no idea what an ICHRA was. So that's, 2 out of every 3 employers don't know what it is. The other thing I'd say about, and I'm not a broker, but I've worked with brokers for over 30 years, and some of my best friends are brokers. And the ones that are kind of sticking their head in the sand, what I tell them is that, when we're in this industry so long, you know, we have bias, right? We have baggage that we've accumulated over years. And I said, there's going to be another generation of brokers that come in and see ICHRAs and won't have all that baggage, and they're going to see it's a huge opportunity. So I tell them, you know, you got to get apprised of what's going on here because someone will take it from you. So I just want to throw those in when I had a chance.
No, I appreciate that. Jim, we have a couple of questions on sort of a legislative public policy perspective, and since you face the voters, I'm dumping this one on you. You know, how are they viewed by both state legislators and, to the extent you're aware of, in Congress? And also, since you're going to be on camera real soon, if you could address, I think this is a yes/no question. Are the individual policies that are a part of an ICHRA program, do they have to be purchased through an exchange, or can they be purchased in the open market?
So I'll start with the first question. The second one's easy, which is I've only seen them purchased on the exchange. I haven't seen any off-exchange purchases within ICHRA, but I'll defer that to Craig and Tom. On the legislative side, it's interesting. So most people on both sides of the aisle think that employees making their own decisions is a good thing, and as long as you can help mitigate costs, then it's probably okay. I think one of the things to be concerned about when you talk about, you know, long-term prospects and is this a fad? I mean, I don't like the term fad, but from a regulatory perspective, we do have to remember that a lot of the success of ICHRA really is dependent on legislation and funding that is currently in place that people like myself didn't really support, which is having the taxpayer sort of, at least in the state of Colorado, buoy expensive areas in the state of Colorado. You know, my constituents in Douglas County, for example, saw their net premiums go up in order for folks in the mountain and resort communities rates to go down net after tax credits and all of that. So I don't know that it necessarily falls along party lines, but certainly for those people who are health policy people, I think there's a real differentiation of opinions between whether or not the taxpayer should be buoying stuff like this. And so back to your question about whether or not this is something that's going to be around long term, everybody needs to pay close attention to legislation and regulation, because either one of those things changing could really start to tip the scale the way Tom was describing. And if group rates become more expensive than individual rates again, we're going to be having a very different conversation in the future.
And while we're on the topic of legislation, this was enabled at the federal level, but the states have the ability to influence how it's implemented in their states, such as Colorado having a reinsurance program, but most states not. Is that correct?
That would absolutely be my opinion. And certainly, if you look at what reinsurance did to the premiums in the individual premiums in the most expensive parts of the state of Colorado, that reason alone is where we started going to our clients in those mountain communities and saying, you probably need to consider looking at ICHRA, because I mean, the reductions were colossal. I mean, they really were. And so, you know, if other states follow suit, which I'm guessing some will, although very few states experience the kind of issues that we saw in the resort communities of Colorado, when other states do, I think you're going to see policy follow, just like we've seen in Colorado.
Okay, thank you. Tom, there's a question here. I'll just read it and leave it to you to answer. I've heard about an annual ACA reconciliation or something like that, and that this can be overwhelmingly administratively, I assume, challenging if there are many employees across many zip codes. Can you speak on this, or would you care to pass it along to door number 2?
I'll take a stab at it. So I'm not quite sure what they mean by reconciliation, but there is reporting that's required for it. So there's a 1095B if you're under 50 and 1095C that's if you're over 50. And so that means you have to keep, there's some things you have to keep track of. I mean, the good news is that most of the administrators take care of that for you because they have all the information there. But the reconciliation, I'm just a little confused on that. There is a reconciliation if a member is getting a tax credit, if they're buying a plan through the exchange and getting a tax credit, then there is a reconciliation for the tax credit when they file their taxes. So I guess I'm not exactly sure how to answer that, but those are, there's form filings for the ICHRAs and there's reconciliation for tax credits if the people, I would say that in general, most of our plans that we sell are direct because then the employee's share can be tax-free. If you do buy a plan on the exchange and the employee pays for part of it, their share cannot be tax-free if it goes through the ICHRA. If they get a tax credit plan, if they qualify to get a tax credit plan, it's no longer part of the ICHRA. So that's kind of the difference.
Got it. Do any of you have any final statement? I need 3 minutes at the end, so you've got 30 seconds to say anything that you wish you had said. Otherwise, I'll go into my BAFO closing here.
I just say thanks to Jim and Craig. Thank you very much, and Help on Demand, and you too, Alan. But it's been great.
Thank you. That was my line. So thank you. That's quite all right. I want to thank the three of you. You're obviously expert on this, and I think it was a very informative session. So I want to thank Tom Crennan, who's founder of ColoradoHealth.com and ICHRASystems.com. I'm going to butcher your last name, Craig, but it's Craig Damaraki.
That's perfect.
Oh, how about that? Who's president of markets at Friday Health Plans, and State Senator Jim Smallwood, president of employee benefits of the Moody Insurance Agency. You've all been extremely generous with your time and expertise on this, and I think you've made for a fascinating introduction and exploration of ICHRAs. I also want to thank everyone attending here, listening in on this, for being a part of this initial Help on Demand educational webinar. Collect them all. This is the first of what they hope will be a series of sessions aimed to help you grow your business. You'll be receiving an email soon with a link to a recording of the session, as well as answers to some of the questions we weren't able to get to. In the meantime, please remember to ask your state ACA exchange and the carriers you work with how you can participate in Help on Demand's unique LEAD program. Again, my name's Alan Katz, co-founder of Next Agency. On behalf of all the participants and on behalf of Help on Demand, I want to thank you for joining us and hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Alan.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you all.